Hey everyone, Mike Mulligan here. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am a certified orientation and mobility specialist, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving some tips for how to travel in fall weather. So let's do this. So when doing some research for this video, I really couldn't find much talking about how to navigate fall weather, especially with all the leaves that are covering the ground. So hopefully this video is helpful for those of you who live in this kind of weather and use a cane during the fall. I know a lot of you out there probably don't have to deal with fall or leaves coming down, so this might not be that helpful for you, but for those of you who do travel in these kind of situations, I think this video will be helpful. All right, so now I'm going to give you a little demonstration here on some of the things to consider when traveling in autumn or fall weather, and hopefully give some tips that will be helpful to make traveling just a little bit easier in these conditions. All right, let's start the demonstration.
All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is when you're walking and there's a lot of leaves on the ground, those leaves can be slippery, especially if it just rained or it's damp out. Those leaves can actually cause either a tripping or fall hazard because they do get slippery. So behind me here, I have a bunch of leaves. They're still a little damp. And when I'm walking, if I'm not careful, there's a chance of slipping on these leaves. So one thing I like to tell my clients is if you come up to some leaves that hopefully you'll feel with your cane, especially if it's damp or wet, is to kind of do a shuffle and try and keep your feet connected to the ground as much as possible. And just be careful when you're making those steps into the leaves or through the leaves to get to where you're going. It's kind of like traveling in an icy situation, similar kind of concept. All right, so now for my second point. When traveling in fall weather, especially if it's windy and there's a lot of leaves, that rustling the sound makes from the leaves can really mask a lot of other sounds. So if you're looking across a street and there's a lot of wind and there's leaves, it can really mask the sound of other cars. So that's something to be aware of. So if a street crossing is normally something you can do, but now it's windy and there's a lot of leaves rustling and it's not doable, you might need to ask somebody for help or try and go a different way. So finding solutions around that, but it's just something to be aware of when traveling with leaves and wind. All right, so now we come to my third topic I want to talk about, and that is when leaves are scattered across a pathway or a sidewalk, they can really mask what is underneath it. If you're a cane user, it might be hard to feel what's underneath the leaves and where your next step is going to be. So for my little demonstration here, I have a pathway. There's a lot of leaves scattered on it, and if I was coming up to it with my cane, which I'm doing now, I'm having a hard time feeling the difference between the leaves that are on the grass and the leaves that are on the pathway, which can make it challenging because I want to walk on the pathway, I don't want to walk on the grass. So one thing that I find is helpful is if you do some kind of exploring just to make sure, so you can use your cane, kind of explore under the leaves, and now I'm doing that and I can feel the pathway. Also, I find if you have a big rollerball tip, that's a little bit harder to do that exploring. So in this kind of weather with the leaves, I like using either a mushroom tip or a a marshmallow tip or a marshmallow roller tip to feel what's underneath the leaves. But this is really important, especially at corners. I find that leaves kind of like to huddle there, pack at the corners, so you can, even the bumps that are under there, you might not be able to feel, or even feel the texture changes to know that you've come up to a corner. So that's something to be aware of. So if you know you're coming up to a corner, make sure you take it slow and really explore underneath that to know where you are. All right, finally I want to talk about two more things. And the first thing is that sometimes if the leaves are bad enough and there's enough of them, they can actually cover up landmarks you might be using for your orientation. So that's something to be aware of. You just go a little bit slower, use your cane to explore a little bit more to make sure you're finding those landmarks that are helping you with your orientation. And finally, I just want to mention that if there's a bunch of leaves scattered about and you're trailing a shoreline, so right now I have a grass patch behind me that is connected to the asphalt, and if I were to be trailing that to find, say, an intersecting pathway, if there are a lot of leaves scattered where those two intersect, it can be hard to tell exactly where my shoreline is. So right now I have my cane out in front of me, there's a big batch of leaves, and when I'm using my cane, I'm sweeping my cane left and right, the leaves are kind of feeling like my shoreline, which can cause me to go off track. So one thing that can be helpful, I've found, is that when you're sweeping left and right, even lifting up your cane if you're using constant contact or if you're two-point touch, just really sticking it out there onto the grass. So right now I am sweeping it far to the left onto the grass, so I know where that grass line is. I have found that has been kind of a solution or a helpful way to navigate this kind of scenario.
So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope these tips were helpful in learning how to travel in fall weather, especially if you're using a white cane. I'm sure there's more tips out there and I'd love to hear them. So if you add them in the comments below, that would be awesome. And thank you so much for joining me. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing and have a wonderful day.